Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Be seated. Fear. We can fear as a person. We can fear as a family, a community, a nation, even a world. Franklin D. Roosevelt said in 1932, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." He knew the true power of fear. He knew that he had to conquer it before fear conquered our nation in the Great Depression. Fear. It can be small fear, it can be trivial fear, it can even be perceived fear, and it can be big or small. But in truth, when it's happening to you, it is always big and it's always real. When I was a small child, we used to go downtown Charleston. Painted on the side of a building was this very scary man. The man was made out of hats. His eyes, his nose, his ears, everything about him was hat. And he was called the Hat Man. And he advertised the Mad Hatter, the man who made hats in town. But he was scary. And I was just a little child at the time. And I can remember whether it was day or whether it was night. As we drove to that intersection, I began to get down lower and lower in the back seat, until I slipped down to the floorboard, scared to death, even when my father would laugh and say, "Son, it's just a painting. He's not going to get you." In my world, the goofy hat man may seem like a joke today, but it was not to that little boy. We all have childhood fears. We can all tell stories about something, whether it was under your bed or in your closet or up in the attic. We all have them. But then one day we grow up. But the only problem is, so do our fears. We can fear for things like our children's safety, fear of bad health, fear of making ends meet, fear of losing our job, or maybe even a loved one. I can remember, it doesn't seem that long ago, I remember we as a nation came together after 9/11 in fear. That's what we were doing. We were all clinging to each other in fear of the unknown and what was going to happen next. Fear. Fear is something that can get so powerful that it can truly be what we would call the Goliath that tries to control us. And this is what we're hearing about today in the Hebrew Testament. Believe it or not the gospel today. We're going back to the Old Testament. And it's the story of one that I always love, the story of David and Goliath. One of the famous ones. We all remember it from childhood, from our Sunday school. Everyone here can tell at least the cliff notes of what happened if somebody was to ask you. And it's also a foretaste and a tasteless, or not taste, but a selfish advertisement for a class that I'm going to be doing this fall called Slaying Your Goliath by John Omer. We all know the story of David and Goliath. But how does it really relate to us in our everyday life? Well, let's take a look at it and see. We find ourselves today in the middle of a battle scene between the Philistines and the Israelites. You can imagine them on two hills with what a wadi that is in the middle, which is a dry riverbed. And there each day they're just staring at each other. Both armies face each other for 40 days, hitting their spears. They would come down at each other, hitting their spears and swords on their shields, screaming at each other, trying to bring fear into the other person's heart. Well, finally the advantage seems to start sliding towards the Philistines. They have a champion. They have a champion fighter, and his name is Goliath. And you can imagine him like Rocky Balboa or any other hero for them. Here he comes through the crowd. They say that Goliath is large, 6 cubits and a span, which is 6 foot 9 inches tall, almost 7 foot. So he would have definitely grabbed your attention. We know that he's also a skilled warrior, and so they would have brought fear for that too. But I'm going to tell you that Goliath was huge, but this was not his biggest weapon. Sometimes we overlook this. Like a bully on the playground, his threatening words are the biggest weapon of all. What Goliath does is mental warfare against the Israelites. He would yell, "Why do you not come down to draw up for battle?" What he's saying to the Israelites, "Hey, you're cowards. Here I am." He even goes and threatens them by himself. "Bring somebody out and we'll both go at it." And they're scared. He's calling them cowards over and over. And if that's not enough, he then says, "Am I not a Philistine?" What he's saying to an Israelite is, "I always thought y'all were superior to us. I thought y'all were the better people. I thought you had this God that is so strong and so powerful. Where is he now? Come, here I am, standing here. Come get me." And as the fear keeps creeping in, you know they want to go at it, but they just sit there and don't know what to do. And then if that's not enough, he then hits them with the words, "Are you not a servant of Saul?" For the Israelites, this is a huge insult, because they are only supposed to serve God and God alone. See, the Israelites know there's a little deeper than this. And they have a reason to feel guilty, and it is starting to play with them. If we remember the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel 8, remember the Israelites want a king. But God does not want them to have a king. He sends them judges and prophets to help rule Israel, because God is the only king. But the people want to be like the other countries around them, and they want a king too. And God warns them through the prophet Samuel that, hey, if you do this, these things are going to be taken away from you. You don't want an earthly king. I am your king. But they rebel over and over, and they want a king so bad that finally God says, "I give up. I'll anoint Saul to be your king, but I'm not for it." And now here they are. So Goliath is now insulting them by telling them they're not serving God, they're serving Saul. As Father Omer says in his book, Goliath, like anyone engaged in warfare, is trying to demoralize the enemy by starting to plant seeds of doubt in their minds. He wants the soldiers to wonder if they made a mistake by making Saul their king. And the truth, it starts to work. They are terrified to hear these words, as we see in 1 Samuel 17, when it says, "When Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, Goliath, they were dismayed and greatly afraid." What they're afraid of is they're starting to get the seeds of doubt in their mind. Suddenly they start looking at each other going, "Wait, is God with us? Is God still protecting us? If we go to battle, will God be on our side?" The doubts start to come in them like cold water among our bodies. And they begin to doubt. Their doubt and fear finally paralyzes them on the battlefield, and they can't go any further. But not David. David is a young man, and he's a young shepherd. And he's been going down every few days to go see his brothers because his father tells him to bring rations to them. And so every time David is here, he's hearing this Goliath. He sees this Goliath. He hears the taunting of Goliath. He hears the threats of Goliath. And this is a child who's about 12 years old, give or take 2 years either way. But there is one thing David knew as he's looking at Goliath and looking at the scared Israelites. He knew that there was one thing bigger on that battlefield than Goliath, and it was God. He knew it. And so therefore, he went to Saul and he says, "I want to fight him." Saul, of course, I believe is absolutely being loving to David and says, "David, you're not going out there. First of all, you're a child. He's a grown man. You have no skill. He's had skills of a warrior since he was a child. It's no match. You can't do this." But David reminds Saul of his gifts. And he says that he has fought lions and bears to protect his sheep. Now, I will tell you that all shepherds in that day would have known how to use a slingshot or their spears. They would know how to ward off predators against their sheep. Now, lions and bears, you better have God on your side for that one. I don't know how, but the rest of it, they would have this skill, and he presents his skills to him. But in this case, David has another thing that the rest of them don't have on that battlefield. David has God. David knew God was bigger. David knew God was stronger. David knew God was all-powerful. And David knew that God can destroy chaos and evil in this world. So David gets 5 smooth stones. The 5, of course, people have asked me why 5 stones. And it actually, I will go into it one day, not today, but it just lets you know that we look at a letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and it's also the breath of God. In other words, the one that solves and stops chaos and evil in the world. He takes the 5 stones and he puts it in his bag, and he goes out to face Goliath. And as we know, Goliath is furious. He feels insulted that they brought this little child among him. And he and David actually start exchanging insults with each other. Finally, it's actually Goliath who starts marching towards David, and David starts running towards Goliath, pulling out the rock, taking the slingshot out, and as we know the famous, hits him in the forehead, knocks him out, and down he goes face first. And then to add insult to injury for Goliath, David pulls out Goliath's sword and chops his head off. On that day, he knew that God could defeat a powerful fear, a powerful evil. The Israelites win the day because they did in fact have God. And it took a shepherd boy to remind them of this. It was there all along. He had to show them that God was there. So what about you? What is the big fear in your life that has come between you and God? What is it in your life that is so big that it's become your Goliath? Is it fear itself? Is it fear of change in the world? God knows there's a lot of it, isn't there, in our community as well as the world. Is it fear of not having enough? Is it fear of what other people may think about you? The cause of these fears are all around us. We can find these Goliaths everywhere. One of the biggest places that I think that we see Goliath hanging out today, believe it or not, I think is in social media. Now, I am not against social media. I want to tell you that right up front. I think social media is wonderful, but the problem is with all good things also comes a negative side. The problem is I think we're seeing some of that negativity growing bigger and bigger each day. Social media at times can be a true place of fear because there are people who use words and control of the mind of others. We see people today using harmful words and mind games against other people all the time. We've seen children bullied over and over and over on social media so much we have the name cyberbullying. I mean, how's that? It's happened so much we've got a word for it. We have seen people publicly humiliated and ridiculed on social media. We have seen people even take their lives because they have been so hurt by social media that they can't take it anymore. We have seen people's reputations ruined over a simple lie that people start jumping on top of and building on. And when the truth comes out that it is a lie, you never see the apology. And who wants to be a victim of that? The fear is real. I heard a statement on TV the other day, and I'm sorry I don't remember the TV show that it was on, because it was one of those where I'm kind of working and listening at the same time. I will get it for you if you want, because a parishioner did find it for me the last one, the last service. But anyway, it said that latest research is showing a new trend among us. Are you ready? A new trend among us. People are starting not to have an opinion until they see where the direction of their friends on social media are going. That's right. We now have to wait in fear to see what our friends have to say before we can give our opinion. Because God forbid you're on the wrong side. If you think about it, how many of us have honestly hesitated When we thought about saying something or agreeing with someone, maybe even in love, but then you're scared, if I put that down, what's somebody going to say about me? People's opinions have become social Goliaths. We have played Goliath as well as we played David. Magazines can also be a social Goliath, giving people the fear of self-image. Do I look right? Do I make enough? Do I look okay in my car? Am I wearing the right clothes? Am I too heavy? Am I too skinny? Am I too tall? Am I too short? We see this all of the time. Sometimes it may even be old seeds in our heads from the past, making us think that there is a Goliath, our fear that is standing before us, that isn't actually there, but it is in our mind. But here's the good news. Here is the good news. Like David, God is with us. We belong to God. It is Jesus who died and was resurrected so that we could be God's own forever. We need to have real confidence in this so that together we can stand up to the Goliaths of the world. Father Omer gives a popular saying that I think we should all remember. He says, don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big God is, because God is bigger. What David had is what I would call a non-anxious presence. In other words, when we have real confidence and calmness in God like David, it is in this calm of God that we can start to think calmly of what is before us. And it's in that calmness we can start to step forward on that battlefield and defeat the Goliaths in our lives. The hat man when I was a kid may seem trivial and silly, but in truth, no fear is trivial, silly, or small when it's standing before us. But neither is God. Know that you are His, just like David did. Let us remember this as we move forward as a people and a church. Our community in the world is changing all the time and can cause fear in us. But let us not allow the Goliaths, our fear, to lead us, but instead allow it to be God who leads us. Let the love of God be your weapon to defeat fear and evil. Let the love of God help you defeat the fear in our neighbors' lives by being there for them. Let the love of God make you know that you are not alone, because you're not. I'm not alone. I have God and I have you, and I know that. And you're not alone because you have God, you have me, and we have each other. That's what it's about. That's what God's love is all about. You are not alone. You have God and you have us. Know the power of God, just like David. And if you do, we can knock down any Goliath that wants to threaten or stand before us. Amen.
Amen.